Today, I will be explaining every South Park character that was killed off, starting with Jack Tenerman. Jack Tenerman, a former Denver Broncos player from the 1970s, and father to Scott Tenerman, was killed off in Season 5, Episode 4, which aired on July 11, 2001. The character appeared primarily in flashbacks, representing a conventional family man whose life intersected with South Park's chaotic narrative structure in ways that resulted in permanent consequences for multiple characters. Jack's background established him as husband to Diane Tenerman, who was later revealed through retconned storyline developments to be Cartman's biological mother, creating a paternal connection that remained unknown to Cartman at the time of the killing. The episode, titled Scott Tenerman Must Die, centered on Cartman's elaborate revenge scheme against Scott, who had previously tricked Cartman in a transaction involving pubic hair, which Cartman purchased for $16.12 under the mistaken belief that it would accelerate his puberty. The humiliation Cartman experienced from this prank, in which Scott repeatedly conned him through increasingly complex schemes, resulted in Cartman devising what would become one of the series' most disturbing revenge plots. The plan involved manipulating circumstances so that Farmer Denkins would shoot and kill both Jack and Diane Tenerman after Cartman convinced Scott to set up a scenario in which the couple would attempt to steal Denkins' pony. Following the murders, which occurred off-screen, Cartman harvested the bodies and ground them into meat, which he then used to prepare chili that he served to Scott at a chili cook-off event. The reveal occurred in front of Scott's favorite band, Radiohead, who had been invited to the event under false pretenses, and the band members proceeded to mock Scott for crying after discovering he had consumed his own parents. This episode marked a significant escalation in Cartman's character development, demonstrating a capacity for sociopathic behavior that exceeded previous established boundaries, and it resulted in the episode being frequently cited as one of the darkest moments in the series' entire run. The in-universe justification centered entirely on Cartman's disproportionate response to what began as a relatively minor teenage prank, but the real-world creative decision served to satirize revenge narratives and explore the limits of dark comedy within animated television. Years later, Season 14's two-part episode 200 and 201, which aired in April 2010, retconned Jack Tenerman's relationship to Cartman by revealing that Jack was actually Cartman's biological father, meaning Cartman had unknowingly killed his own father and fed him to his half-brother. This revelation added layers of tragic irony to the original episode, as it meant Cartman's most elaborate revenge scheme had resulted in patricide without his knowledge, and it also explained Cartman's partial ginger heritage, which had been a source of prejudice he had expressed throughout multiple episodes. The retcon was presented through recovered archives and testimony from various characters who had been involved in the original cover-up of Cartman's paternity, including his mother, and various South Park residents who had participated in maintaining the deception. Jack Tenerman remained permanently dead following his initial killing, with no revivals or resurrections occurring in subsequent seasons, and his death continued to serve as a reference point for discussions of Cartman's psychological profile and moral development throughout the series. The character's legacy existed primarily through the paternity reveal and its implications for Cartman's identity, emphasizing how permanent consequences could exist within South Park's otherwise fluid continuity, and the death stood as one of the few instances where the show maintained consistent long-term ramifications for a character's actions across multiple seasons, spanning nearly a decade. Diane Choxundi. Diane Choxundi, introduced as the boys' fourth-grade teacher in Season 4, Episode 11, titled Fourth Grade, which aired on November 8, 2000, was killed off in Season 6, Episode 4, Professor Chaos, which aired on April 10, 2002. The character functioned as a replacement teacher during a period when Mr. Garrison temporarily left his teaching position, and she was characterized by her strict demeanor, her exaggerated physical appearance featuring notably sagging breasts that extended to her waist, and her unfortunate surname, which became a running joke throughout her tenure on the series. Ms. Brandt. Choxundi's introduction occurred at the beginning of the fourth grade year, when the main characters advanced from third grade and required a new teacher to guide them through the curriculum, and her teaching style contrasted sharply with Mr. Garrison's more erratic approach by emphasizing traditional discipline and academic rigor. The character's design deliberately invoked visual comedy through her physical proportions, and her name, which was pronounced identically to a vulgar phrase, resulted in repeated jokes from students and adults who struggled to address her professionally without acknowledging the unfortunate phonetic similarity. Over the course of her appearances spanning approximately 2 seasons, Ms. Choxundi developed a romantic relationship with Mr. Mackey, the school counselor, which was depicted through various episodes showing their awkward courtship and eventual sexual involvement, creating a subplot that added dimensions to both characters beyond their professional roles within the school environment. The relationship between Ms. Choxundi and Mr. Mackey was characterized by typical South Park satirical treatment of adult relationships, featuring uncomfortable situations and crude humor, while still maintaining some degree of genuine affection between the characters, which made her subsequent death more impactful for Mr. Mackey's character development. Ms. Choxundi's death occurred suddenly and was discovered when she was found dead at her desk in her home, and the subsequent autopsy revealed the presence of semen in her stomach, which led to immediate suspicion falling on Mr. Bertast's Mackey, given their known relationship. The cause of death remained somewhat ambiguous within the episode's narrative, with possibilities ranging from choking to other unrelated medical conditions, but the episode deliberately left the exact circumstances unexplained in a manner consistent with South Park's tendency to treat death with dark humor rather than procedural accuracy. The episode Professor Chaos utilized her death as part of a larger narrative device in which the show teased that a character would never be seen again, creating a cliffhanger that was resolved through Ms. Choxundi's unexpected demise, rather than through one of the main characters or more prominent supporting cast members. The in-universe explanation remained vague and treated with characteristic irreverence, while the real-world creative decision reflected the show's creators choosing to phase out the character following the return of Mr. Garrison to his teaching position, which eliminated the narrative necessity for a replacement 4th grade teacher. Following her death, Ms. Choxundi remained permanently deceased with no resurrections or supernatural returns, though she was occasionally mentioned in passing during later episodes when characters referenced past teachers or discussed the school's history of teacher turnover and unusual deaths. The character's elimination from the series allowed the show to return to its more familiar classroom dynamic with Mr. Garrison, and it demonstrated how South Park treated supporting characters as expendable elements that could be removed when they no longer served the current narrative direction. Her death also contributed to the series' running commentary on the instability and chaos of the South Park elementary faculty, highlighting how teachers regularly faced bizarre and often fatal consequences for their involvement with the town and its residents, and it reinforced the show's willingness to permanently remove characters rather than maintaining a static cast structure. Veronica Crabtree, the school bus driver who appeared from the series premiere Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, which aired on August 13th, 1997, was killed off in Season 8, Episode 13, titled Cartman's Incredible Gift, which aired on December 8th, 2004. The character was established as a fixture of the children's daily routine, driving them to and from South Park Elementary, while maintaining a consistently cranky and hostile demeanor toward her passengers. And she was visually distinguished by her raspy voice, her perpetually disheveled appearance, and the bird's nest that inexplicably resided in her hair throughout her tenure on the series. Veronica Crabtree's character served primarily as a minor antagonist to the children during their bus rides, frequently yelling at them to sit down and be quiet while demonstrating little patience for their antics or complaints, and her voice work was initially provided by Mary Kay Bergman until Bergman's death in 1999, after which the role was taken over by other voice actors who maintained the character's distinctive raspy vocal quality. The character's function within the show remained relatively consistent across her 7-season run, providing a recognizable adult authority figure who represented the mundane irritations of childhood without contributing significantly to major plot developments, though she occasionally appeared in episodes beyond simple bus driving scenes when the narrative required additional South Park residents to populate events or gatherings. The circumstances of Crabtree's death centered on the episode's plot involving a serial killer named Michael Dietz, who was murdering residents of South Park, and Cartman's claim that he possessed psychic abilities that would allow him to solve the murders, which he was using to manipulate the police department and gain attention. As part of the serial killer's spree, Veronica Crabtree was murdered in her home through stabbing, and her body was discovered with additional post-mortem mutilation in which a bird from her hair pecked out her eyes, adding a grotesque detail that referenced her most distinctive visual characteristic. The investigation into her murder became entangled with Cartman's fraudulent psychic investigation, during which he provided false leads and incorrect information while the actual killer continued operating, and eventually the real psychic abilities of another character were required to actually solve the case and apprehend Michael Dietz. The in-universe justification for her death was simply that she became a victim of the serial killer's random violence, serving as one of several casualties that drove the episode's plot forward, while the real-world creative decision to permanently kill the character likely stemmed from her diminished role in recent seasons, and the complications associated with maintaining voice actor continuity following Mary Kay Bergman's death. Following Crabtree's murder, the school bus driver position was eventually filled by other characters, including Ms. Claridge, who took over transportation duties in subsequent seasons, and Veronica Crabtree was never resurrected or brought back through any narrative device despite South Park's occasional use of supernatural or science fiction elements that could theoretically allow for such returns. The character's death was treated with the same irreverent tone that characterized most South Park deaths, receiving minimal mourning from other characters and being primarily used as a plot device rather than as an emotional character moment, which was consistent with her status as a supporting character rather than a central figure in the show's ongoing narratives. Her removal from the series represented the end of an era in terms of the show's earliest established supporting cast, as she had been present since the very beginning, and her absence marked a shift away from some of the original recurring characters who had populated South Park Elementary's ecosystem. The bird's nest in her hair, which had been a running visual gag throughout her appearances, was never explained within the show's canon, and it remained one of many unexplained absurdist elements that characterized South Park's approach to character design and background details that existed purely for comedic effect without requiring logical justification. Margaret Nelson. Margaret Nelson, a 6th grade teacher introduced in Season 19, Episode 6, titled Tweak X Craig, which aired on November 11, 2015, was killed off in Season 24's South Park Q Vaccination Special, which aired on March 10, 2021. The character emerged during a period when South Park had significantly expanded its faculty roster to accommodate increasingly complex storylines involving school administration and educational policy, and she represented a younger, more progressive generation of teachers who aligned with the show's contemporary satirical targets regarding political correctness and social justice movements within educational institutions. Ms. Nelson's introduction occurred during an episode that dealt with the rise of yaoi fanfiction depicting two of the male students, Tweak and Craig, in a romantic relationship, and her character responded to this situation with the measured supportiveness that characterized many of the newer faculty members introduced during South Park's later seasons. Over her appearances spanning multiple seasons, Ms. Nelson participated in various school-related storylines, often appearing in faculty meetings or classroom scenes where her presence served to populate the educational environment without necessarily driving major plot developments, though she occasionally contributed to discussions about school policy and student welfare in ways that reflected the show's ongoing commentary about modern educational systems. The character's role remained relatively minor compared to long-established teachers like Mr. Garrison or Mr. Mackey, but she represented the show's evolution toward including more diverse faculty perspectives that could be used to explore contemporary educational controversies and administrative challenges. Ms. Nelson's death occurred within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic special episodes that South Park produced in response to the real-world coronavirus outbreak, and the South Park Vaccination Special dealt specifically with vaccine distribution and the various conspiracy theories and political divisions that emerged around vaccination efforts. The plot of the special involved the main characters attempting to secure and distribute vaccines to the South Park community, including efforts to vaccinate teachers and other vulnerable populations before the virus could claim more lives, and Ms. Nelson's infection and death occurred despite these vaccination efforts reaching her too late to prevent her contraction of the disease. The scene depicting her death showed her collapsing in her classroom as students and other faculty members attempted to provide assistance, but the boys arrived with vaccines moments after she had already succumbed to the illness, creating a tragic timing element that emphasized the stakes of vaccine distribution and the real consequences of delays in public health responses. The in-universe explanation for her death centered entirely on the pandemic context, treating her as a casualty of the COVID-19 outbreak that served to underscore the serious nature of the health crisis, even within South Park's typically satirical framework, while the real-world creative decision to kill the character reflected the show's approach to addressing the pandemic's actual death toll and the real losses experienced by communities, particularly within professions like teaching, where exposure risks remained high. Following her death, Ms. Nelson remained permanently deceased with no revivals, and subsequent school scenes acknowledged her absence through visual gaps in faculty meetings and classroom assignments being redistributed among surviving teachers, maintaining continuity regarding her death, rather than simply ignoring it, as the show sometimes did with minor character removals. The mourning period depicted in the special was brief but genuine, showing other faculty members and students processing the loss in ways that reflected real-world grief responses to pandemic deaths, and this treatment marked a somewhat unusual approach for South Park, which typically handles death with more overt comedy rather than acknowledging emotional weight. Her death contributed to the pandemic special's overall tone, which balanced South Park's characteristic satire with recognition that the COVID-19 crisis had resulted in genuine tragedy and loss that required some degree of acknowledgement, even within a comedic framework, and the decision to kill an established character rather than creating a disposable one-off victim demonstrated commitment to showing stakes and consequences within the storyline. As of current episodes, Ms. Choxundi, Nelson's teaching position has been filled by other faculty members or remains vacant, and her death stands as one of the few instances where South Park directly engaged with real-world tragedy in a manner that treated the subject with relative seriousness rather than pure satirical detachment. Leslie Meyers, a fourth-grade student introduced in Season 19 as part of the season's overarching narrative about online advertising and gentrification, was killed off in Season 19, Episode 10, titled PC Principal Final Justice, which aired on December 9, 2015. The character was presented initially as a new student who had recently arrived in South Park, appearing to be an ordinary girl who quickly integrated into the fourth grade class and began participating in school activities and social dynamics alongside the established student characters. Leslie's introduction coincided with Season 19's serialized storyline, focusing on PC Principal's arrival at South Park Elementary and the broader themes of political correctness, gentrification, and corporate manipulation that defined the season's narrative arc, and her character played an increasingly important role as the season progressed toward its climactic revelations. Over the course of her appearances throughout Season 19, Leslie demonstrated unusual knowledge and capabilities that gradually raised suspicions among some characters, and she became romantically involved with Kyle while simultaneously manipulating various situations to advance what would eventually be revealed as a coordinated agenda connected to the season's villain organization. The character's true nature was eventually exposed when it was revealed that Leslie was not actually a human child, but rather a humanoid advertisement, representing a new form of advertising technology that had achieved sentience and physical form, capable of integrating into human society while serving the interests of corporate advertising networks. This revelation connected Leslie to a larger conspiracy involving sentient advertisements that had infiltrated South Park and other communities, working to promote gentrification and consumerism, while manipulating residents through their ability to pass as ordinary humans and build trusted relationships. The conspiracy's scope extended to PC Principal himself, who was revealed to have been manipulated by the advertisements through their exploitation of his political correctness ideology, and Leslie functioned as one of the primary agents working to maintain control over the situation while preventing humans from discovering the advertisement's true nature and objectives. The climactic confrontation occurred in PC Principal Final Justice, when the full extent of the advertisement conspiracy became clear, and PC Principal had to choose between continuing to serve the advertisement's agenda or fighting back against their manipulation, and he ultimately chose to resist after recognizing how he had been used. During the final battle sequence, PC Principal confronted Leslie directly after her advertisement nature had been fully exposed, and the confrontation escalated into physical violence as PC Principal attacked the entity that had been deceiving everyone throughout the season. The killing itself was executed through PC Principal punching his fist completely through Leslie's head, and her body subsequently exploded in a glitchy, digitized manner that visually confirmed her non-human nature and technology-based existence. The in-universe justification for her death centered on the necessity of defeating the advertisement conspiracy and preventing further manipulation of South Park's residents, while the real-world creative decision served to conclude Season 19's serialized narrative in a definitive manner that eliminated the advertisement threat and allowed subsequent seasons to move on to different satirical targets. Following her destruction, Leslie Meyers remained permanently eliminated from the series with no resurrections or returns, and the advertisement storyline was largely abandoned in favor of other themes, though occasional references to gentrification and corporate influence appeared in later episodes without directly connecting to the sentient advertisement concept. The character's brief tenure on the show, lasting only a single season across 10 episodes, represented South Park's experimentation with more heavily serialized storytelling during this period, and her role demonstrated how the show could introduce characters specifically designed to serve season-long narrative arcs, rather than becoming permanent additions to the cast. Her death marked the conclusion of one of South Park's most ambitious attempts at sustained serialization, and the subsequent return to more episodic storytelling in later seasons suggested that the creators viewed this experimental approach as something to occasionally revisit rather than adopt as a permanent format change. Satan, the ruler of hell, who had been a recurring character since Season 1, Episode 10, titled Damien, which aired on February 4th, 1998, and who also appeared prominently in the 1999 South Park film South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, was killed off in Season 22, Episode 7, titled Nobody Got Cereal, which aired on November 14th, 2018. The character had been established as one of South Park's most enduring supernatural figures, appearing in numerous episodes over 2 decades, and consistently portrayed not as a purely evil antagonist, but rather as a complex, often sympathetic character who struggled with personal relationships, self-esteem issues, and existential questions about his role as Hell's administrator. Satan's characterization throughout the series subverted traditional depictions of the devil by presenting him as emotionally vulnerable, frequently involved in dysfunctional romantic relationships, and often seeking validation and happiness, rather than simply causing suffering, which created a satirical commentary on religious mythology, while also allowing for genuine character development across his many appearances. The character's most prominent storylines included his abusive relationship with Saddam Hussein, which was featured extensively in the South Park film and several subsequent episodes, depicting Satan as the victim in a relationship with a manipulative human dictator who exploited Satan's emotional dependence and desperate need for love. Following his eventual separation from Saddam Hussein, Satan pursued other relationships and attempted to find healthier romantic connections, including a relationship with a man named Chris. And these storylines consistently portrayed him as someone seeking personal growth and emotional fulfillment, despite his position as the embodiment of evil. Satan's role in South Park expanded beyond romantic subplots to include various episodes where he provided advice to characters who had died and arrived in hell, hosted parties and events in his domain, and occasionally intervened in earthly matters when situations required supernatural involvement, or when he had personal stakes in outcomes affecting people he cared about. The character became notable for his sensitive, often effeminate personality traits, his elaborate Halloween parties, his gym membership and fitness concerns, and his general portrayal as a well-meaning individual who happened to be Satan rather than as a malevolent force, creating a consistently comedic contrast between his infernal position and his mundane personal concerns. Satan's death occurred during a 3-episode arc addressing climate change through the return of Man-Bear Pig, Al Gore's mythological creature that represented environmental catastrophe, which had been introduced in earlier seasons as a ridiculous hoax, but was recontextualized in Season 22 as a genuine threat that South Park's residents had ignored to their detriment. The storyline depicted Man-Bear Pig as an unstoppable force destroying the town and killing residents while demanding satisfaction for a pact that had been made generations earlier by South Park's founders, who had sold future generations safety in exchange for economic prosperity, creating an allegory for humanity's failure to address climate change and the consequences being paid by later generations. During the climactic confrontation with Man-Bear Pig, Satan emerged from hell to fight the creature in an attempt to stop its rampage and save the town, resulting in a brutal battle sequence in which Man-Bear Pig physically overwhelmed Satan and literally ripped him apart, killing one of the series' longest-running characters in shocking fashion. Following his death, Satan's soul ascended to heaven in a scene that provided both closure to his character arc and ironic commentary on redemption and salvation, as the devil himself achieved paradise after sacrificing himself to help others, suggesting that his attempts at personal growth and his final heroic act had earned him transcendence beyond his original role. The in-universe justification for Satan's sacrifice centered on his desire to help people and potentially redeem himself, while the real-world creative decision served multiple purposes, including providing genuine stakes for the climate change and allegory, subverting expectations about character immortality in South Park, and concluding Satan's long-running character arc in a manner that felt emotionally resonant despite the show's typically irreverent treatment of death. Following his death and ascension to heaven, Satan has remained permanently absent from the series with no returns or resurrections, and his death represents one of the few instances where South Park eliminated a major recurring character in a definitive manner that appears intended to be permanent. The character's absence in subsequent seasons has been notable given his previous frequent appearances, and Hell-related episodes have either avoided addressing who currently rules Hell or have suggested that the domain continues functioning without a clear replacement for Satan's administrative role. Satan's death marked the end of one of South Park's most developed character arcs, spanning over 20 years of episodes and demonstrating the show's capacity for long-term character development, even while maintaining its episodic structure and satirical focus. And his final heroic sacrifice provided an unexpectedly sincere conclusion to a character who had evolved from a simple parody of religious mythology into a genuinely sympathetic figure whose journey explored themes of redemption, self-worth, and the possibility of change. Pip Pirip, a British exchange student who first appeared in Season 1, Episode 4, titled Damien, which aired on February 4th, 1998, and who received a dedicated episode titled Pip in Season 4, Episode 5, which aired on November 29, 2000, was killed off in Season 14, Episode 6, titled 201, which aired on April 21, 2010. The character was based on the protagonist of Charles Dickens' novel Great Expectations, and his design and personality reflected this literary origin through his polite British mannerisms, his old-fashioned clothing, including a top hat, and his consistently cheerful demeanor, despite being regularly bullied and ostracized by other students at South Park Elementary. Pip's introduction established him as an outsider within the 4th grade class, and he endured constant physical abuse and verbal mockery from other students, particularly Cartman, who led the general mistreatment while Pip maintained his polite responses and continued attempting to befriend his classmates despite their rejection. The character's dedicated episode, Pip, presented an extended parody of Great Expectations, featuring Pip in a storyline that closely followed the novel's plot while incorporating South Park's characteristic crude humor and satirical elements. And this episode represented one of South Park's most unusual format experiments, essentially replacing the regular characters with a literary adaptation featuring Pip as the protagonist. Despite receiving this spotlight episode, Pip never achieved significant popularity among fans, and his role in the series gradually diminished over subsequent seasons as the show shifted focus away from school-based dynamics and toward more topical satire and complex storytelling structures. The character's declining prominence reflected broader changes in South Park's approach to its cast, as Butterscotch emerged as a more versatile and popular supporting character who could fulfill similar narrative functions while offering more comedic potential and development opportunities. Pip's appearances became increasingly rare after Season 4, with only occasional background presence in classroom scenes or brief cameos in episodes requiring large gatherings of students. And by the time of his death in Season 14, he had essentially been phased out of active storylines for several years. The circumstances of Pip's death occurred during 201, which was the second part of a 2-episode arc dealing with censorship, celebrity lawsuits, and South Park's controversial Muhammad episodes, creating a storyline that brought together numerous celebrities and plot threads from throughout the series' history in a chaotic confrontation. During the episode's climactic sequence, various celebrities and factions battled in South Park streets while attempting to gain control of Muhammad and his supposed immunity to mockery. And Mecha Streisand, the giant robot form of Barbara Streisand that had appeared in earlier episodes, rampaged through the town, destroying everything in its path. Pip's death occurred when he was simply crushed beneath Mecha Streisand's foot during this rampage, receiving no dramatic buildup or final words, just sudden death as collateral damage in the larger battle occurring around him. And his corpse was shown flattened on the ground, while other characters continued fighting without acknowledging or mourning his demise. The in-universe explanation for his death was purely circumstantial, presenting him as an unfortunate victim who happened to be in the wrong place during a catastrophic event, while the real-world creative decision likely reflected the character's obsolescence within South Park's evolved format and the creator's desire to definitively remove a character who no longer served any narrative purpose. Following his death, Pip remained permanently deceased with no resurrections or returns, and subsequent episodes featuring classroom scenes or student gatherings simply excluded him without explanation or acknowledgement, treating his removal as final despite South Park's occasional willingness to resurrect characters for comedic purposes. The character's death sparked some discussion among fans who had appreciated Pip despite his minimal screen time, but the general response acknowledged that he had become irrelevant to the show's direction, and that his elimination allowed the writers to focus on characters who better served contemporary storylines. Pip's absence reinforced the show's evolution away from its earlier focus on elementary school dynamics, and toward more politically and culturally engaged satire that required different character types and narrative structures, and his death symbolized South Park's willingness to permanently remove elements from its original formula when they no longer contributed meaningfully to the show's current identity. Jerome McElroy, known as Chef, who appeared from the series premiere Cartman Gets an Anal Probe and served as the South Park Elementary cafeteria chef and mentor to the main characters until Season 10, Episode 1, titled The Return of Chef, which aired on March 22, 2006, was killed off following real-world controversy surrounding his voice actor Isaac Hayes' departure from the series. The character functioned as one of South Park's most important supporting cast members throughout the show's early seasons, providing a consistent adult perspective that differed from the incompetence or maliciousness of other adult characters, and Chef offered the boys advice on relationships, sexuality, and life in general, though his guidance often reflected his own obsession with sex and romantic encounters. Chef's characterization combined soul music performer aesthetics with genuinely caring mentorship, as he frequently broke into elaborate R&B songs about love and sex, while also demonstrating real concern for the boys' well-being and attempting to guide them through childhood challenges. And Isaac Hayes' vocal performance brought authenticity and musical talent that made Chef's songs legitimate musical moments within episodes rather than simple parodies. The character's role extended beyond school cafeteria scenes, to include involvement in various town events, supernatural occurrences, and adventures where his knowledge of South Park's history and his connections to different community members made him a valuable resource for resolving plots or providing necessary exposition. Chef's relationship with the boys, particularly his patient responses to their inappropriate questions about sex and adult topics, created running gags about childhood innocence confronting adult sexuality, and his tendency to respond to any question with a song about making love became one of South Park's most recognizable character traits during the show's first 9 seasons. The circumstances leading to Chef's departure and subsequent death began with Season 9, Episode 12, titled Trapped in the Closet, which aired on November 16, 2005, and which satirized Scientology and several of its prominent celebrity members, including Tom Cruise, through plotlines depicting the religion's beliefs and practices in deliberately unflattering ways. Isaac Hayes, a Scientologist, reportedly objected to the episode's treatment of his religion, and in March 2006, he issued a statement announcing his departure from South Park, claiming the show's religious intolerance had become unacceptable to him, despite having voiced a character in a show that had mocked virtually every other religion and belief system for 9 seasons. The show's creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, responded by suggesting that Hayes' decision had been influenced by the Church of Scientology rather than representing his genuine personal choice, and they proceeded to create The Return of Chef as both a farewell to the character and a response to what they perceived as Hayes' hypocrisy and the Church's manipulation. The episode depicted Chef returning to South Park after having been brainwashed by the Super Adventure Club, a fictional pedophilia organization that served as a transparent allegory for Scientology, and the episode showed Chef attempting to molest children while spouting the cult's propaganda about finding fulfillment through sexual encounters with young boys. The boys initially tried to save Chef and return him to his normal self, believing that their friend was being controlled against his will, but their efforts failed, and Chef became increasingly violent and deranged as the Super Adventure Club's programming dominated his behavior. The death sequence itself was extraordinarily brutal and prolonged, showing Chef falling off a bridge after the boys tried to snap him out of his brainwashing, then being impaled on a tree branch, catching on fire, being shot by a hunter who mistook him for an animal, falling into a river, being mauled by a mountain lion and a grizzly bear, and finally defecating himself before expiring, creating one of the most excessive death scenes in the series' history. Following this initial death, Chef was revived by the Super Adventure Club as Darth Chef, a Frankenstein-like cyborg version who briefly terrorized the town before being destroyed through the boys' intervention, ensuring that no possibility existed for the character's return, even in zombified or supernatural form. The in-universe explanation blamed the Super Adventure Club for corrupting and ultimately causing Chef's death, while the real-world creative decision clearly served as retaliation against Isaac Hayes and the Church of Scientology, using Chef's death to express anger about Hayes' departure, and to satirize what the creators viewed as Scientology's hypocrisy and manipulative practices. Following Chef's death, the character remained permanently absent from the series, with his cafeteria position eventually filled by other minor characters, and Isaac Hayes' 2008 death from a stroke eliminated any possibility of reconciliation or the character's return. The boys concluded the episode by distinguishing between Chef, whom they remembered fondly as their friend and mentor, and the brainwashed entity that had attacked them, suggesting that the real Chef had died when the Super Adventure Club captured him, and that the person they killed was not actually their friend anymore. This framing allowed the show to maintain respect for the character Chef had been, while still brutally satirizing the circumstances of Hayes' departure. And it provided closure for one of South Park's longest-running and most beloved supporting characters in a manner that reflected both genuine loss and bitter commentary on religious institutions and celebrity influence. If you enjoyed this comprehensive look at South Park's most notable permanent character deaths, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more deep dives into animated series history and pop culture analysis.